Maccabee's got to do what a Maccabee's got to do. I don't know if I'll be ready tonight, but I'm practicing the night before Hanukkah. All right, welcome to our Torah study today. We're going to be looking at Hanukkah. Hanukkah is not as simple a holiday as you might think. It involves complex ideas and culture and religious wars, and I want to talk about that a little bit today, just the backdrop a little bit of Hanukkah. And to prepare for Hanukkah, everybody has to watch the Rugrats Hanukkah. That will prepare everybody for it. God, thank you for this study, Lord God. Thank you for the light of the world, Yeshua. And thank you that we too are the lights of the world. We bless you in this in Yeshua's name. Now, it is clear that Yeshua in John chapter 10 has celebrated the Feast of Dedication. Hanukkah is from the word Hanach, to dedicate. And it's a holiday that celebrates the rededication of the temple and the sanctity of Jerusalem, and regaining the country back from the Syrians. Although the Jerusalem was in Jewish hands during the Maccabean wars, it took about 10 years for them to be completely sovereign. And then you know that in about 60 BCE, the Romans came in, supposedly to resolve an issue of rulership, and they saw that as a wonderful opportunity to simply take over. So that's how we got Roman rule in Israel. But before that, these are the events. So Alexander the Great, you know, conquers the known world, and he dies early, about age 29, and there's all kinds of questions about how he died. Was it because of his lifestyle? Was he assassinated? Nobody quite knows, but clearly in 323 he passes, and the four generals are vying for parts of the kingdom, of his empire. So Ptolemy, one of the generals, got Egypt, and Judea was part of Egypt. So the Ptolemies got Egypt and Judea, and the General Seleucus, the Seleucids, got what is now Syria and what's called the Levant, which would be Lebanon and so forth, all of those areas. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemies would vie back and forth for the land of Judea, the land of Canaan, basically. Not because there was such a big, there was oil there or there was gold there, but Canaan had what was called the Via Mara, and the main highway that connected Europe and Africa ran through it along the coast of Israel. So that was an important one. It was an important route, but it also contained very important harbors. It's happy people coming in. That's good. All right. So after the death of Alexander the Great, 323, Judea became part of the kingdom of the Ptolemies, Egypt, and so forth and so on. However, in 200 BCE, Antiochus III, he's called Antiochus the Great, of Syria, defeated King Ptolemy V, Epiphanius of Egypt, in the Battle of Panium. So now the target shifts. Your pew is ready. We kept it safe for you. Okay, you two are a riot. All right. So the land of Judea shifts from the Ptolemies after the death of Alexander to the Seleucids. And now the Seleucid Empire is in charge, and Antiochus III he tells the Jewish subjects, you can worship the way you want. He gives the Jewish people their right to continue to practice the Jewish religion. They can worship in the temple, and he's a benign king. But then 25 years later, a Hellenized sect comes into the picture, and they're not studied enough, but they're called the Tobiads. And the Tobiads go all the way back to Nehemiah and Ezra and Nehemiah. And Tobiah caused some trouble for Ezra and Nehemiah. He wasn't exactly their friend, right? So he caused trouble. So these Tobiads are in the land all this time, and they're gaining wealth, and they're gaining influence, and they're very busy politically, and they're very busy in business, and they're gaining tremendous influence and wealth over these hundreds of years. And they tend to be Hellenists. They ingratiate themselves with the Hellenistic movement that Alexander the Great initiated. And so the Tobiads convinces Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, to invade Jerusalem and capture Jerusalem. The temple is captured and looted, and the temple services ceased, and Jewish practices are outlawed in 167 BCE, and he orders, Antiochus Epiphanes, orders the altar to Zeus to be erected in the temple area. You probably know that. And then pigs are going to be slaughtered there, right? So the question is, why? Why this shift in 25 years from a benign dictatorship, if you will, from his father to Antiochus Epiphanes, who now is convinced by the Tobiads, remember, very wealthy, influential sect of Hellenists, Jewish Hellenists, to invade Judea and to do all of this and to disrupt Jewish life. So the question is why? So Antiochus later is beaten by the Romans, and so the Romans impose, as they always do, heavy taxes. So the burden falls upon Antiochus to pay these heavy taxes, which he can't pay, right? There's not enough income. So he's forced to furnish a pot of gold that really he cannot afford, and Antiochus, this is the elder Antiochus, dies. Seleucus IV takes over and further oppress the Jews. Why? Because he has this heavy burden of taxes that he can't pay, and he's burdening the inhabitants of Judea, the wealthy of, not the Tobiads, mind you, but the wealthy of Judea, to do what? To pay these taxes. So from these perils, from battles that he's lost, the Hellenists, the Tobiads' influence is increasing. They really want to be in charge, and they oppose the priesthood of Jerusalem. And there's this great antagonism. It's not just with the Samaritans, but the Tobiads. There's basically a civil war going on, as there was, by the way, when the Second Temple was destroyed, just before the Second Temple destruction. It was the civil war that allowed the Romans to actually break the power of the Jewish armies, the Zealots, and invade the temple area and capture Jerusalem and destroy it. Right? Same thing, internal strife, division within. So Yochanan the high priest sees, that's Jonathan, sees the danger from this Syrian Greek influence into the Holy Land, and he tries to stop it. Whereas the Hellenists are looking to bring the beauty of Greco-Roman civilization into Jerusalem, into Israel. Jonathan is trying to hold the fort and push back on all of this. So he's opposing any attempt on the part of the Jewish Hellenists to introduce Greek and Syrian customs. And this is the era, by the way, where we begin to see changes in the text. As people are translating the Hebrew text into Aramaic and into Greek, they're trying to avoid all anthropomorphisms. They don't want anything to look like Zeus coming down and being with mankind, right? to do whatever he wants to do. So any idea of a divine Messiah, which we would see in the Apocalypse of Abraham, for example, is eradicated, is suppressed. That book is suppressed, right? In reaction to the Hellenists. So Seleucus, again, he needs money to pay the Romans, so he sends his minister, Heliodrus. Heliodrus is ordered to take money from where? Who has money? Well, the temple has money, especially from the half shekel. The half shekel for the firstborn, right, it accumulates when you talk about millions of Jewish people inhabiting the land, and how many of those are firstborn, and taxes and tithing and so forth and so on. The temple has a lot of money. So Yochanan is begging this minister, please don't do this. But Heliodrus disregards Jonathan's plea, and he enters the gate of the temple. And the story goes that as he enters the gate of the temple, he turns pale and collapses as a divine act of God. And so when he came to, he refused to go back into the temple, right? So now a short time later, Seleucus is killed, and his brother, this is the culprit, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, begins to rule over Syria. And he is determined to take over the temple and the temple treasury, to pay this Roman tribute, and to maintain his rule. He is described by Josephus as a tyrant. He's rash, he's impetuous by nature, he's contemptuous of religion and the feelings of others. He's called Epiphanes, which means beloved of the gods. But a historian of his time, Polybius, gave him the name Epiphanes, which means the madman. He changes his name. He thought he was a crazy guy, right? So he's harsh, he's ignoble. There's nothing nice about this guy. So he's suppressing everything Jewish. He tries to take away the individualism of the Jews. He suppresses dietary laws. He forbids circumcision. He forbids the study of the Torah. This is when the dreidel comes about, right? The little dreidel. They used this little dreidel, and I don't know if they had the letters on it at that time, but they used the dreidel to kind of, when they came around, they hid the Torah, they hid the scriptures, and started playing with this dreidel, still emphasizing the teaching, but with subterfuge with the dreidel, right? They were just playing this innocent game, but that's the way it's come about. And if it happened like that, we're not quite sure. But that's the story anyway, right? So Yochanan's brother Joshua, he is a Hellenist. And so what happens is that the high priest, Jonathan is removed from the temple in Jerusalem. And in his place is this guy Joshua, who is a total Hellenist. And he is also the one, he calls himself Jason. If you read in...
Son of Nun?
Huh?
Is that Joshua, son of Nun?
No. No. This is the brother of Jonathan, the high priest. Right? So Joshua calls himself by a Greek name, Jason. And in this Hellenistic party, he spreads Hellenism more and more and more. Jason now is later... Not too much later, but this is the intrigue of this entire era. He's replaced by another guy, Menelaus. And Menelaus promised the king that he'd bring more money. So if the king, Epiphanes, says, you're going to bring more money, we can pay the Romans, you're the guy. Okay? And so thus became the trend of the high priesthood in Jerusalem. And the joke was that he was the high priest who could pay the largest sum, right? Who could give the Romans, the Greeks, the largest sum. So the high priesthood was bought from time to time, right? So Antiochus is engaged in a war against Egypt, not too unusual. And Rome comes in and says, you're spending money we don't have. So you have to stop the war, right? So now a rumor comes to Jerusalem that Antiochus had trouble in the war. He had to stop the war because something has happened to Antiochus. It's a total lie. So what happened is the people thinking Antiochus is dead. You catch what's happening here? All of this, the Maccabean revolt, is guided by the need for the tribute to Rome. And whoever can get the job done is the guy. Okay? And whether it's the Jewish guy or the Gentile guy, whether it's the Hellenist or the Judean, whoever can get for Antiochus the money for Rome, that's the one that's going to play out. Right? So that's what's driving all of this. That's what eventually produces this festival of Hanukkah. Right? So the treacherous high priest flees. Menelaus flees because the people rebel against him. And when Antiochus hears about this rebellion, he knows he's going to be removed by Rome, right? Because the two things you can't do, you can't stop the money flow and you can't have civil disobedience. So he quickly gathers his army and he falls upon Jerusalem and the Judeans, and thousands upon thousands of Jewish people were killed. And he erects, again, these harsh decrees against the Jews. Any kind of Jewish worship, forbidden. Scrolls of the law were confiscated and burned. Shabbat, no more Shabbat. No more circumcision, just like before. No more kosher. Nothing, under penalty of death. Right? One of the respected elders, Rabbi Eliezer, he was about 90 years old, was ordered by the servants of Antiochus to eat pork as an example to others that they would eat pork. He refuses to do it, and so they force the meat to his lips. But he refuses to do that, and what do you think he does? What do you think Antiochus does? He kills him. Right? And there were a lot of martyrs. Hannah, the story of Hannah, Judith, all of those intertestamental books cropped up during this era, the heroes, if you will, that refused to bow down to Antiochus. So one day, Antiochus sends his people to Modin, small village, but there lives an older priest called Mattathias, right? Matthew. And Mattathias sees that the Syrian officers are building an altar in Modin in the marketplace, and they order Mattathias to offer sacrifices to the Greek god. And he replies, and this is all in 1 Maccabees, he replies, I and my sons and my brothers are determined to remain loyal to the covenant which our God made with our ancestors. So a Hellenistic Jew approaches the altar, and his idea is, why should we die? Let's offer the thing, and they'll go away. Then we can do what we want. So the Hellenistic Jew is going to offer the sacrifice to the idol, and Mattathias does what? He grabs his sword, and he kills this guy. And his sons and friends fall upon the Syrian officers and the men, and they kick them out of the city. Right? So they killed many of them. They chased them away. They destroyed the altar. And Mattathias knows what? He knows that Antiochus is going to be enraged, right? So he knows he's going to be punished. He knows the city's going to be punished. So he leaves the village. This is all, again, in 1 Maccabees. If you haven't read it, you should. It's an incredible story, really. So he leaves the village of Modin, and he flees with his sons to the hills of Judea, and there he begins a strategy of guerrilla warfare, right? So all the loyal and courageous Jews join him. And his rally, interestingly enough, is not, let's rally around Jerusalem, let's rally around God. His cry, his battle cry is, rally around the Torah, right? Because the Torah is this it's not just the 5 books. By that time, it had become a symbol for the covenant between God and the Jewish people. Every rabbinic decree was a Torah. A legend was a Torah. A story about Eliezer was a Torah. A story about the additions to Daniel was a Torah. All of these things, it was a grandiose term. And the thing was, he couldn't rally the nobles. He couldn't rally the rich people. He couldn't rally many. But he did rally a few. Before his death, he brings his sons together. He urges them, continue this rally around the Torah and encourage people. God will give us a victory. And now, this family was the Hasmoneans, or Asmoneans. That was the family name. But they picked up an acronym, Maccabee, or in Israel it's called Maccabi. And Maccabi is from the words Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai. If you take the first letter of each of those, Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai. Who is like you among the gods? I.e., we won't worship any other god. We will worship the true God. That acronym is the Maccabee, or Maccabi, right? So the Syrians muster 40,000 soldiers, seasoned soldiers, mind you. These are trained people, and the Judeans might have 3,000, might have 2,000. We're not quite sure of the number, but clearly it's a 10-to-1 thing, right? It's by human reckoning, the Jewish people should have been wiped out. Okay, so what happens? There's a series of gatherings, and one of the gathering is at Mitzpah. Now, Mitzpah is the city that you see when you're traveling to Jerusalem. That's the first city that you see in preparation of going to Jerusalem. From Mitzpah, you can see Jerusalem. And on all of the festivals, as people went to this particular city, they could see the pilgrims, especially at night, with their torches. It was like one gigantic light, right? One gigantic light. That's why Yeshua is preaching on Hanukkah, I am the light of the world, right? Because they saw this processional, right? That was like just one gigantic torch. It's an amazing thing. You could see 20, 30 miles away. It's an amazing sight. So they gather at Mitzpah. The a prophet whose name was Samuel, offers prayers to God. And all of a sudden, unexpectedly, the Judeans win battles against the seasoned veteran soldiers. And now, people are excited and inflamed, and they're beginning to think, maybe God's going to give our land back to us. And they start gathering by the thousands, and they win a goodly number of battles, and they come to Jerusalem and they liberate Jerusalem. And there was incredible joy. So they take the idols that were placed there by the Syrians, and they smash them, and they get rid of them, and they set them on fire outside of the city. And on the 25th of Kislev, in 139, we see that they built a new altar. And they get back the golden menorah that was stolen by the Syrians. And no, they don't get it back. It was stolen by the Syrians, so they make a cheaper one. Okay? It doesn't look as good. It's cheaper. They don't have what they had before, but it's sufficient for their purposes. The problem is, according to the law, they had to have oil sanctified, special oil that was sanctified by the priesthood, and they only had enough for one day. That's what the not in First Maccabees, but in the later books, that's what's recited, and it's recited in the Mishnah. Oil for only one day. But miraculously, it lasted a full 8 days in time for them to create more oil. So they're busy, the priests are busy getting these oils, they're preparing the offerings. The order and shalom of the city was reestablished. The farmers came back to the land. They started farming again. As I said, these Jewish farmers, these Jewish priests, these Jewish Levites, left their plows in the field. I mean, they just left everything there and just took off for the hills and joined the Maccabees. So they went back and they picked up their plows and they just started plowing again. And so the richer Jewish people started to buck up. By the way, this was the beginning of the demise of the Tobiads for obvious reasons. They had sided with the wrong people, right? And in those days, what had happened is if you were a Seleucid and the Ptolemies ruled, you simply sided with the Ptolemies and you became the high priest. And then when the Seleucids won, and they took back Jerusalem, and you sided with the Seleucids and you became the high priest. Well, all of that was done away with the Maccabees. And the Maccabees were going to put their people in charge. And that went awry down the road as well. So they began to fill the temple with praise and dancing, and the goal had been reached, and they began to study the Torah again. Normal living, obviously, was not immediate. It took a while. So what had happened is from Mattathias, Judah the Maccabee, Judah the Hasmonean took over, and he kind of mopped up the operation. He was a great strategist, and several other brothers died in these battles. It was tough to farm and to carry on business, but they did. They were able to do that. And they said the battle has not been won completely, so they continued until the Syrians were driven out. And there was a treaty made, and Judea was free again. That's the story of Hanukkah. It's sad because it had to be a story that was driven really by what a foreign power needed to pay off another foreign power. And the traders, the Tobiads, and those that were the Hellenists, you can imagine what they were thought of by the Judeans. They were thought of in the same way as the Samaritans were thought of, right? As idolaters. A lot of these Hellenists actually went through a reverse circumcision, if you can imagine that. To remove the disdain of the mark, as they said. And so the antagonism was enormous. Right? Is there a question before I go on? I want to go to the parashah a little bit. No questions? Okay. So the story of Hanukkah is a little more complicated, right, than just a couple of victories and 8 days of oil. It has to do with God giving victory to the few. And what does that mean? It means that when God interjects himself into history, you can win with very little. You can succeed with very little. That the little you think you have can be multiplied, and just a few loaves and fishes can be what? Can feed a multitude. Right? And here's Yeshua on the scene saying that very thing in the light of Hanukkah, just maybe a century and a half, having been won, the victory having been won, and he feeds the multitude and everybody's shocked. And yet, a few thousand won over 40,000, right? So these are dichotomies when Yeshua is in the boat and he's talking to them and chiding the disciples for a lack of faith. And he said, didn't I just feed a whole bunch of people with nothing? Right? So we forget, right? We forget the monies are low and you have to pay the bills, or your health isn't that great and you have to go to work. Like, I have a back today. Why? I don't know. I have a back. Okay. But God with very little can produce very much. And we have this in the story of Joseph again. Perhaps you remember that the parashah from last time ended with the cupbearer forgetting Joseph. And it looks like Joseph's going to remain in jail. But what happens? Pharaoh has a dream. And the cupbearer says, nobody can interpret this dream. So he tells Pharaoh, I know a guy from prison when Pharaoh was angry at his servant, meaning me. And there was this guy, this Hebrew, in the prison that predicted the outcome for both of us. And here I am serving Pharaoh again. Perhaps he's the one that can interpret this dream. So in chapter 41, verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the pit, and he shaved himself. Why? Because hairiness was not appropriate for Egyptians. That is going to become very important in just a moment. And he shaved himself and changed his garments, and he came before Pharaoh. And what did he look like? Did he look like a Hebrew slave? No, he looked like an Egyptian. Okay? He had gained the favor of the captain of the guard, whose house was next door to the prison. So he changed his clothes. Who gave him the clothes? It's obvious. The captain of the guard gave him Egyptian clothes and gave him whatever he needed to shave his head, shave his body. Now, what's the point of all of that? When we see his interaction with Jacob, this is going to come up again. Because he's going to ask Jacob, how old are you? And the question is, why does he want to know? Because Jacob has a full beard and is gray and looks old. But Pharaoh is clean-shaven, body oils, nice clothes, because the Egyptians did not wish to age. If you take a look, there is not one old Egyptian in any of the reliefs, right? The pictograms there on the walls there in the plaster, there's not one old Egyptian. You will not see a gray hair on any of the beards of the Egyptian pharaohs. You just won't see it. They're all young, they're all alive, they're all, doing their thing, but they're very two-dimensional, aren't they? If you remember from any of the pictures that you've seen in books or movies, they're very two-dimensional, and they're very much alive. And their concept of life is, in the afterlife, we're going to do what we're doing now. If you're a fisherman, when you die, they bring your heart to the scales. And if your heart weighs good, you come into being a fisherman there on the Nile that overflows its banks forever. But if your heart is bad, then this horrible thing that looks like a cross between a badger and a wolf and a bear comes and rips you to shred, and your afterlife is gone. Right? But if you live, you're eternally young. And it's depicted in reliefs, young people, clean-shaven, eternal youth. Pharaoh is still a pharaoh. All the pharaohs are still pharaohs. All of the governors are still governors. All of the generals are still generals. Okay? You get eternally what you've practiced in life. Now, why is this important? This is important because the Egyptians could not do allegory. They had no literature that had allegory in it. Jewish literature, Hebrew literature is filled with allegory. The shining sun is the face of God, warming the earth and bringing life to everything that it touches. That's allegory. To the Egyptians, the sun is a god, and the sun is a sun, and shines bright. They know it's necessary for an agrarian culture, but they're not going to make it into an allegory. You're not going to see a poem about it. Okay? So, to an Egyptian, a cow is a cow. To an Egyptian, a sheaf is a sheaf. You catch what I'm saying? It's no wonder that the wise men could not interpret the dream, because the dream required someone who could interpret an allegory. And Joseph was the perfect one. He could see it, right? So, I dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. This is 41:15 and 16. Remember what I said? Only pagans dream a dream. Hebrews dream, and he dreamt. But pagans dream a dream. When Joseph first tells his brothers about his dream, how does he describe it? I dreamed a dream. He describes it in pagan terms. It's a foreshadowing that he is going to be a pagan. He's going to be an Egyptian. Okay? Now, things get better. Okay? Joseph learns his lesson. Things get a lot better, right? But I dreamed a dream, and I've heard it say that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, apart from me, only gods. He's purposely ambiguous. He doesn't say the God of the Hebrews. He uses the word Elohim. Now, Joseph knows what he means. But to be politically correct, he uses Elohim. The gods. All right? The gods, apart from me, it's not in me, but only in gods shall give Pharaoh an answer of shalom, a wholeness of peace. Your heart will be at peace when you get the answer. So, Joseph is not a leader, but he is a politician. Okay? He's not a leader. He's not fit to be a leader. But he is definitely an organizer. He's a manager. He's a politician. And Joseph said it to Pharaoh. This is 25 to 32. The dream of Pharaoh is one. And what Elohim is about to do, he has decreed unto Pharaoh, the 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. It's an allegory. And the 7 lean and ugly cows, the word there is not ugly, it's ra. Evil. Yeah, evil cows. Came up only after 7 years. And also the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind, they shall be 7 years of famine. That is the thing which I spoke unto Pharaoh, that which God is about to do. He has shown Pharaoh, behold, 7 years are coming of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt. Then there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. All the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine that shall follow. For it shall be grievous, very grievous. And as for repeating the dream twice to Pharaoh, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass, right? Gods are going to bring it to pass here. So, now, look at what Joseph says. Okay. I was reading from 25 to 32. Now I'm going to read from 33 to 36. Okay?
What chapter?
Genesis?
From Genesis.
I'm sorry. 41. We're still in 41. We're at the beginning of this story. So clearly, Joseph is the interpreter. He could do something that all of the wise men couldn't do. Okay? So look at, now he's going to advise Pharaoh. Before Pharaoh has a question, before Pharaoh makes a speech, before Pharaoh says, well done, boy, okay? Joseph interjects, and he makes a suggestion. Now, therefore, now that you know the dream, let Pharaoh look out for a discreet and wise man. Joseph has already been described as a wise man. And let him be over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land and muster, and the Hebrew word here means to muster by force. Okay, it's a little mini army. To muster by force the land of Egypt in 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that come, and lay up the grain under Pharaoh's hand for food in the cities. And let them guard it. Oh, now we get it. The people that are being mustered to grab the grain, it's not like the people have a choice. This is Pharaoh's decree. It's gathering up all the grain, right? And they're going to guard it so that nobody steals it in Pharaoh's greenhouses. And the food shall be for a store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which will be in the land of Egypt, and the land will not perish. So, Joseph's already laid out what kind of a guy Pharaoh needs. Joseph's laid out the plan. So Pharaoh says to his servants, now look, Pharaoh already gets it. Joseph has laid out his resume. Pharaoh's already bought it. Now he's got to convince his guys. And Pharaoh says to his servants, can we find a one as this, a man whom the Spirit, the Ruach Elohim. Now Joseph, in front of Pharaoh and his servants, has already talked about Elohim, right? He knows something about Elohim. The Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is none so discreet and wise as you. He uses exactly the same words. There's nobody as discreet and wise, even in the same order. You shall be over my house, and to your mouth all the people shall yield. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. You're not going to be Pharaoh, but you'll be second to Pharaoh in terms of this project. It doesn't mean that Joseph can decree any law he wishes. He is second to Pharaoh in this matter. Okay? Making sure that this all takes place. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, this is 41 to 44, look here, I have set you over the whole land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. What is the signet ring? The signet ring is Pharaoh's authority, and it's also a sealer of documents. Right? You get a scroll, you put some wax on it, signet ring. That's Pharaoh's signature. So whoever sees that's going to obey. Right? Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold collar about his neck, sign of royalty. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Abrech, make way. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without you no man shall lift up his hand or his foot in the land of all. No man can do anything, no man can accomplish anything, or walk anywhere, go anywhere, without you saying it. Okay? This plan has got to be fulfilled. Okay? So what's happened? His adolescent dream is becoming fulfilled, but in a way that he never expected. He had a dream, all right. The music man isn't here, so I'm going to take advantage of continuing. All right? So he's almost to the top. Of course, his brothers, his father and mother, are not bowing to him, but the dream is coming to pass. Remember, the brothers were mad. They thought, you're making it up, you little proud brat. But the father, Jacob, hid it in his heart because he knew something was up. Okay. Verses 45 and 46. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath Paneah, and gave to him to wife Asenat, the daughter of Potipharah. This is not Potiphar. It's Potipharah. And notice, a priest of On. So now Joseph is connected to the power structure of Pharaoh and the power structure of the priesthood. The priesthood and the Pharaoh ruled Egypt. A Pharaoh could not rule without the priesthood, and the priesthood could not rule without the Pharaoh. As a matter of fact, when Egypt conquered Nubia, Nubia was rich in gold. And so the Pharaoh of the time gave great gifts to the priesthood, specifically to gain their favor. So that was a very strong connection. If the Pharaoh fell out of favor, the priesthood would contrive a revolt against that Pharaoh. And likewise, if the priesthood weren't doing what they needed to do on behalf of the Pharaoh, he could initiate a revolt in the priesthood. And it was this constant battle back and forth. But cleverly, Pharaoh gives Joseph the daughter of the priest of On. Right? Incredible. Potipharah, he to whom Ra has given. Right? In other words, Ra has given his permission. And the sun god Ra, On was the town of Heliopolis, the great city of Amun-Ra. Right? Very powerful, powerful priesthood. And his wife's name means she who belongs to Nath, the goddess Nath. So now you're linked up to the favor of the gods, the favor of the priesthood, the favor of the Pharaoh. You are in tight. No one can touch you. Right? So he's going to accomplish what Pharaoh wishes him to accomplish. So Joseph, let's see here. Yeah, let's take a look at 49. Joseph laid up grain as the sand of the sea, and very much until they left off numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons, this is 50 to 52, before the year of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of Heliopolis, bore to him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. And what is his name? He who causes to forget. What does he want to forget? His home in Canaan and all that's come about. Okay? Manasseh. For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, which means the fertile land, specifically not Canaan, but Egypt. Joseph right now has become fully Egyptianized, right? For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. How about that? Okay? So, the famine in 56 and 57 is indeed over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened the storehouse and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine was sore in the land of Egypt, and all the lands came to Egypt. Of course, this is setting up what? All the lands are coming. This is going to include Jacob. He's going to send his sons. Now, I just a comment, because we're getting close to, I know the music people are going to come and set up. I want you to take note of how Joseph sets this up. Joseph gathers all the grain. Now, it does not mean that he didn't pay for it. Okay? The Egyptians are being paid for the grain. But now, in the time of famine, grain is more expensive. So what is Joseph going to do? He's going to sell the grain to the Egyptians. And then what are the Egyptians going to do when their money runs out? They're going to sell their lands. And so they sell their lands. Now Pharaoh has their money, all the money that he spent and more, and all the land of Egypt. When the lands are exhausted, what must the Egyptians do? They have no more money, they have no more land. They sell themselves. And now every Egyptian is a slave. Carol, look at you. Now the Egyptians are slaves to Pharaoh. Now I want you to know the antagonism that this sets up. I'm almost done. Do you catch the antagonism here? The Egyptians see the Hebrews prospering in the land, but the Egyptians are the slaves and the Hebrews are free. Do you think that sets up a little bit of antagonism? It sets up an antagonism for when there's a Pharaoh that does not know Joseph and tells the Egyptians, I'm going to reverse this. You're going to be the free guys, and the Hebrews are going to be the slaves. And do you think he's popular? You better believe he's popular. That's where we leave off, okay? I went ahead because we're not going to get to that part, because the next parasha is way beyond this, okay? In the same way, right? Joseph is not a leader, because he could have had Pharaoh give the people the grain, right? The job of Pharaoh was to take care of the people. But instead, Joseph devises a way to enslave the Egyptians, to own their land, and to have all of their money. Joseph himself, without maybe seeing it, sets up the Exodus story. Sets up the whole slave. And in a weird way, also sets up the deliverance of the Jewish people out of Egypt. Right? It's very interesting. So God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the story. Thank you for Yeshua also, who gave his life, who was a sufferer for the household of Israel and the household of the world, oh God. The true light of the world. And we bless you, Lord, for the story repeating many, many times and culminating in the New Covenant story and culminating really in our lives as well. We bless you in Yeshua's name. All right. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in just a few minutes for the service. All right? Shalom.